On my 63rd birthday, my daughter-in-law handed me a document in front of everyone. "This is your present, sign the house transfer or we'll throw you out on the street." Everyone laughed at me. I refused and she slapped me. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I never imagined my 63rd birthday would be the day my own family would try to steal everything from me. The morning started like any other. I woke up in my bedroom, the same room I'd shared with my late husband Robert for 37 years, and for a moment, I felt that familiar flutter of excitement. It was my birthday, and my son Michael had promised to make it special. He'd been so insistent about having everyone over, even his wife Jessica, who usually found excuses to avoid family gatherings. I should have known something was wrong. I spent the morning cleaning the house, the same house Robert and I had bought as newlyweds in 1982. Every corner held memories: Michael's first steps in the hallway, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, quiet evenings with Robert on the porch swing. The house wasn't just where I lived, it was who I was. Jessica arrived first, which surprised me. She never showed up early for anything. She swept through my front door like she owned the place, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her phone screen as she typed furiously. "Kathy," she said without looking up, "we need to set up the dining room differently today." I watched as she began moving my furniture around without asking. The antique dining table Robert had restored by hand was pushed against the wall. My grandmother's china cabinet was relocated to make room for what looked like a makeshift office setup. "What's all this for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Jessica finally looked at me, and something in her smile made my stomach clench. "You'll see. It's part of your surprise." By 3 o'clock, the house was full. Michael arrived with his 2 children from his first marriage, Emma, 22, and David, 19. My sister Patricia came with her husband, along with a few neighbors Jessica had somehow convinced to attend. Everyone seemed unusually formal, like they were attending a business meeting rather than a birthday party. The cake was beautiful, I'll give Jessica that. 3 layers with delicate frosting roses, sitting prominently on the relocated dining table. But when I moved to cut it, Jessica stopped me. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying that authoritative tone she usually reserved for her real estate clients. "We have something to give you first." Michael stepped forward and I felt a surge of hope. Maybe I'd been imagining things. Maybe this really was just an elaborate surprise party. "Mom," he said, but his voice sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced the words. "Jessica and I have been talking, and we think it's time." "Time for what, sweetheart?" That's when Jessica produced the manila envelope, thick, official-looking, with legal letterhead visible through the paper. She set it on the table in front of me like she was presenting evidence in court. "Happy birthday, Kathy," she announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is your gift." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The documents inside were dense with legal language, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Transfer of property, quitclaim deed, immediate possession. My name was typed throughout, with blank signature lines waiting for my pen. "I don't understand," I whispered. Jessica's smile widened. "It's simple. You're going to sign over the house to Michael and me. Today. In front of everyone." The room went dead silent. I could hear the old grandfather clock in the corner ticking, each second stretching like an hour. "Sign over my house?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. "You're 63 years old, Kathy," Jessica said, her tone becoming more businesslike. "You can't maintain this place forever. Michael and I are young, we have stable income, and we can take care of everything. You can move into that nice senior community across town." I looked at Michael, waiting for him to tell his wife this was all a mistake, a terrible joke. Instead, he nodded. "It makes sense, Mom. The house is too big for you now, and the upkeep costs are only going to increase." Someone in the room, I think it was Patricia, let out a small chuckle. "Finally," she said, "someone's talking sense to her." That chuckle spread. I watched in horror as my own family, my neighbors, the people I'd invited into my home, began to laugh. Not with me, but at me. The sound grew louder, more confident, like they'd all been waiting for this moment. "Just sign it, Kathy," Jessica said, producing a pen from her purse. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "And if I refuse?" Jessica's mask slipped then, just for a moment. Her perfectly composed expression turned cold, calculating. Then you'll be evicted. Michael is prepared to file papers claiming you're mentally incompetent. The house will go to him anyway, but this way is cleaner. Nicer. The laughter died down, but the smirks remained. Even Emma and David, my own grandchildren, were looking at me with something between pity and impatience. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart breaking, something deeper than that. The last thread of naive trust I'd been holding on to. No, I said quietly. What? Jessica's voice sharpened. No. Louder this time, stronger. I will not sign my house away. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. Jessica's palm connected with my cheek with a sound that echoed through the dining room. The force of it knocked me sideways, and I had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. You stubborn old woman, Jessica hissed. You're going to regret this. But as I stood there, my cheek burning, looking at the faces of people who just witnessed my daughter-in-law assault me and done nothing, I realized something. The humiliation, the betrayal, the complete disrespect. It had awakened something in me I thought was long dead. I touched my stinging cheek and looked Jessica directly in the eyes. We'll see about that. The house felt different after everyone left. Not empty-haunted. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the aftermath of my birthday party from hell, and tried to process what had just happened. Jessica had orchestrated everything perfectly. The witness, the documents, even the timing. She'd planned this humiliation down to the last detail. But as I cleaned up the remnants of my untouched birthday cake, something Robert used to tell me kept echoing in my mind. The most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. I'd been married to Robert for 37 years before cancer took him 3 years ago. He'd been a quiet man, methodical, the type who thought 10 steps ahead in every situation. And he'd never liked Jessica. There's something about her, Kathy, he'd said after Michael first brought her home 6 years ago. She calculates everything. Watch how she looks at our things like she's taking inventory. I defended Jessica then, chalked Robert's concerns up to protective father instincts. How stupid I'd been. After the funeral guests left that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and really thought about the past few years. Jessica's behavior started making sense in a way that chilled me to the bone. The suggestions about updating my will just to be safe after Robert died. The way she'd insist on handling the paperwork whenever contractors came to fix something. How she'd volunteer to help with my bills, claiming it would reduce my stress. Only to complain about how much I was spending on basic maintenance. And Michael, my sweet boy who used to call me every day, had slowly stopped reaching out. When I called him, Jessica was always in the background, and conversations became shorter, more stilted. She'd been poisoning him against me so gradually I hadn't noticed until it was too late. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in years. I went up to the attic. Robert's office was exactly as he'd left it. His desk, his filing cabinets, his old computer that I'd never learned to use properly. But it wasn't the computer I needed. It was the small fireproof safe he'd installed behind his bookshelf. My hand shook as I turned the combination dial. Robert's birthday, then mine, then the day we'd bought the house. The lock clicked open. Inside were all of Robert's important papers, but also something I'd forgotten about. A small digital recorder he'd used for work. Robert had been an insurance investigator before he retired, and he'd always been paranoid about documenting everything. You never know when you'll need proof of what someone really said, he used to tell me. I found the recorder's charger in his desk drawer and plugged it in. While it powered up, I made myself another cup of tea and thought about everything I knew about Jessica. She worked in real estate, which meant she understood property law. She was ambitious, always talking about bigger houses, better neighborhoods, more expensive things. And she was patient. This plan to get my house hadn't started yesterday. It had been building for years. But Jessica had made one crucial mistake. She thought I was just a helpless old widow who didn't understand anything about legal matters or finances. She had no idea that Robert had taught me everything he knew about investigating people. The recorder beeped softly, indicating it was fully charged. I slipped it into my pocket and called Michael. "Hi, Mom," he answered, but his voice was distracted. I could hear Jessica in the background, saying something about property management companies. "Michael, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday," I said. making my voice sound tired and defeated. Maybe you and Jessica are right. Maybe it is time for me to downsize. There was a pause. Really? You're not just saying that. I'm scared, sweetheart. I don't want to end up homeless. If you think signing the papers is the best thing. Hold on, Mom. I heard muffled conversation. Then Jessica's voice came on the line. Kathy? Michael says you're ready to be reasonable. I suppose I am. I let my voice waver slightly. But I'm still confused about some of the details. Could you come over and explain everything again? I want to make sure I understand what I'm signing. Of course, Jessica said, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. I'll be there in an hour. And Kathy? This really is for the best. You'll see. After I hung up, I went through the house and identified the best places to hide the recorder. Jessica had a habit of walking around as she talked, gesturing with her hands, speaking loudly to make her points. She'd never suspect that the confused old woman she was manipulating had any tricks left to play. When Jessica arrived, she was carrying the same manila envelope from yesterday, along with additional paperwork. I brought some information about senior communities in the area, she said, settling into my living room like she already owned it. There are some really nice places, Kathy. Independent living, but with support services when you need them. I activated the recorder in my pocket and sat down across from her. That sounds wonderful, dear. But I'm still not clear about the timeline. When would I have to move out? Jessica's smile was sharp as a knife. Well, we'd need immediate possession, of course. Michael and I have already put our current house on the market. We need to move quickly. I see. And where would I go while I wait for a spot in one of these senior communities? I'm sure you have options. Maybe your sister Patricia could take you in temporarily. The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. She was talking about making me homeless and didn't care at all. And the money from selling my house would go toward paying for the senior community? Jessica laughed, actually laughed. Oh, Kathy, you're not selling the house. You're transferring ownership to Michael. That's completely different. The house will stay in the family, which is what you want, right? So I wouldn't receive any money? Why would you need money? You'll have a nice apartment, meals provided, activities. What more could you want at your age? I pressed the recorder deeper into my pocket, making sure it was still running. What if I changed my mind later? What if I decided I wanted to move back? Jessica's mask slipped completely then. You can't change your mind, Kathy. Once you sign those papers, the house belongs to Michael and me. Permanently. And frankly, after yesterday's tantrum, I'm not sure we'd want you visiting very often. You clearly have trouble controlling your emotions. For the next 30 minutes, I let Jessica talk. I asked innocent-sounding questions while she laid out her entire plan in detail. How she'd been working on Michael for months, convincing him I was becoming forgetful and irresponsible. How she'd researched the legal requirements for claiming mental incompetence. How she'd already chosen which of my belongings she wanted to keep and which she'd donate. She even admitted to going through my mail when she visited, looking for financial information she could use to build her case that I was fiscally irresponsible. By the time she left, I had everything I needed. But I wasn't done yet. Jessica thought she was the only one who could plan ahead, but she was about to learn that this old woman had a few surprises left. That evening, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to an attorney whose name Robert had kept in his files. The second was to someone Jessica had never met but would wish she had, my late husband's former colleague from the insurance company, a man who specialized in fraud investigation. The third call was the most important. I dialed a number I'd found in Jessica's real estate license information online. Henderson County Sheriff's Office, the voice answered. Yes, I said, settling back in Robert's chair with the recorder beside me. I'd like to report attempted elder abuse and fraud. The pieces were falling into place. Jessica wanted to play games with an old woman she thought was helpless. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. The attorney's office smelled like old leather and coffee. Richard Steinberg had been practicing elder law for 23 years, and his reputation was impeccable. Robert had kept his business card in a special file labeled Important Contacts, along with a note that simply read, Trustworthy. Mrs. Patterson, he said, reviewing the documents Jessica had prepared. I have to tell you, this is one of the more sophisticated elder abuse schemes I've encountered. I sat across from his mahogany desk, my purse containing the digital recorder in my lap. Sophisticated how? Your daughter-in-law has been very careful. She's not technically asking you to give her the house directly. It's going to your son. That makes it harder to prove exploitation. She's also created what appears to be a reasonable justification. You're aging, the house is too much to maintain, family should help. My heart sank. So there's nothing I can do? Richard smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from anyone in days. I didn't say that. What she's done wrong is the coercion, the threats, and especially the physical assault. May I hear the recording? For the next hour, we listened to Jessica's voice laying out her entire plan. Richard's expression grew darker with each revelation. Mrs. Patterson, this recording is a gift. She's admitted to mail tampering, financial surveillance, and intentional emotional manipulation of your son. But we need more. What kind of more? We need to prove a pattern. This level of planning suggests she's done this before, or at least researched how to do it effectively. That afternoon, I called Robert's old colleague, Frank Morrison. Frank had specialized in insurance fraud investigation for 30 years before retiring, and Robert had always said he could find dirt on anyone if it existed. Kathy, Frank's gravelly voice came through the phone. I was sorry to hear about Robert. He was a good man. Thank you, Frank. I need help with something, and Robert always said you were the best. I explained the situation, and Frank was quiet for a long moment. Jessica Patterson, maiden name Henderson, works for Prestige Realty. Married to your son Michael 6 years ago? That's right. How did you? I'm already looking her up while we talk. Give me 24 hours. The next day, Frank called back with information that made my blood run cold. Kathy, your daughter-in-law has quite a history. Before she married Michael, she was engaged to a man named Thomas Brennan, 67 years old, widower, owned a small construction company. What happened? Thomas died in a car accident 2 months before their wedding. Left everything to Jessica in his will. A will that had been changed just 3 weeks before his death. I felt sick. You think she killed him? No evidence of that, but the timing is suspicious. Here's what's more interesting. After Thomas died, Jessica moved to your town and got her real estate license. Within 6 months she'd met Michael. That can't be a coincidence. It gets better. I did some digging into her real estate career. She specializes in working with elderly clients, and she has an unusually high rate of clients who end up selling their homes to family members or going into assisted living. Frank paused, and I could hear papers rustling. There's a complaint filed against her with the State Real Estate Board from 2 years ago. An 81-year-old woman named Margaret Chun claimed Jessica pressured her into selling her house below market value to Margaret's nephew, who happened to be dating one of Jessica's co-workers. What happened with the complaint? It was dropped when Margaret suddenly withdrew it. But I found Margaret's phone number. Want me to call her? Please. That evening, Frank called back with Margaret Chen's story. Jessica had befriended Margaret, gained her trust, then systematically convinced her that she was too old to live alone. When Margaret hesitated to sell, Jessica had her nephew's girlfriend suggest that Margaret was showing signs of dementia. Margaret signed the papers, Frank said, but she regretted it almost immediately. When she tried to fight it, Jessica threatened to have her declared mentally incompetent. Just like she threatened me. Exactly like she threatened you. But here's the kicker: Margaret never withdrew that complaint. The real estate board has it on file as unresolved due to complainant's unavailability. Jessica must have lied to them about Margaret withdrawing it. I felt pieces clicking into place. Frank, can you get me Margaret's contact information? Already did. I also found 2 other elderly clients of Jessica's who ended up in similar situations. None of them filed complaints, but they're all bitter about what happened. That night I made 3 phone calls. Margaret Chun, 79 years old now, living in a cramped apartment across town. Harold Vance, 85, whose nephew had somehow convinced him to deed his farm to the family for tax purposes. And Dorothy Walsh, 73, who'd signed over her house to her stepson after Jessica convinced her it would help with estate planning. All 3 stories were variations of the same theme. Jessica identifying vulnerable elderly people, gaining their trust, then systematically isolating them from objective advisors while pressuring them into signing away their property. She's like a vulture, Margaret told me, her voice shaking with anger. She circles around until she finds someone weak, then she strikes. Why didn't any of you report her to the police? Who would believe us? Harold asked. 3 old folks claiming a respectable real estate agent tricked us? Our own families thought we were getting paranoid. But now there were 4 of us. And I had something the others hadn't, a recording of Jessica admitting to her entire scheme. The next morning, I called Detective Sarah Martinez at the Henderson County Sheriff's Office. She'd been assigned to my initial complaint and had seemed genuinely concerned about what I'd reported. Mrs. Patterson, I have to be honest, elder abuse cases are difficult to prosecute. Family members can usually claim they were trying to help. What if I told you this isn't the first time Jessica has done this? There was a pause. I'm listening. I told her about Margaret, Harold, and Dorothy. About Jessica's pattern of targeting elderly property owners. About the suspicious timing of her relationship with Thomas Brennan. Can you get these other victims to speak with me? I already asked. They're all willing to file complaints now that they know they're not alone. Detective Martinez was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Patterson, if what you're telling me is true, we're not looking at simple elder abuse. This could be organized fraud, possibly even conspiracy. Can you come in tomorrow morning with those other victims? After I hung up, I sat in Robert's chair and looked around the house Jessica was so determined to steal. Every room held memories of the life Robert and I had built together. She thought she could just walk in and take it all because I was old and alone. But I wasn't alone. I had allies now, other people Jessica had victimized, professionals who understood what she was doing, and most importantly, evidence of her crimes. Jessica had made one fatal mistake in her perfectly crafted plan. She'd assumed that being old meant being helpless. She was about to learn how wrong she was. That evening Michael called. Mom, Jessica says you're still being difficult about the house papers. I'm not being difficult, sweetheart. I'm being careful. She's trying to help you. We both are. I closed my eyes, hearing the petulance in his voice that reminded me of when he was 7 years old and didn't want to clean his room. Michael, when did you stop trusting my judgment about my own life? It's not about trust. It's about being practical. You can't take care of that big house forever. And you think the solution is to take it away from me without giving me any say in when or how I leave. There was silence on the other end. Jessica says you're getting emotional again. Jessica says a lot of things. Have you ever wondered why she's so interested in our family's real estate decisions? What's that supposed to mean? I almost told him then. Almost laid out everything I'd discovered about his wife's history, her pattern of manipulating elderly victims, her calculated approach to our family. But I stopped myself. Michael would warn Jessica, and she'd destroy evidence or disappear before the police could build their case. Nothing, sweetheart. I'm just tired. Give me a few more days to think about everything. Okay? After I hung up, I looked at the calendar. Detective Martinez wanted to meet with all of Jessica's victims in 3 days. The attorney was preparing documentation to protect my property rights. Frank was still investigating Jessica's background. Everything was in motion now. Jessica thought she'd cornered a helpless old woman, but she'd actually awakened something much more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose. 2 weeks after my disastrous birthday party, I called Jessica with the most difficult performance of my life. Jessica, dear, I said, making my voice sound weak and defeated. I've been thinking about what you said. About the house being too much for me. Oh, Kathy, she purred, triumph barely concealed in her voice. I'm so glad you're being reasonable. I want to do this right, though. I want to celebrate the transition properly. Would you help me plan a little gathering? Nothing fancy, just family and a few close friends. I want everyone to understand that I'm making this decision willingly. There was a pause and I could practically hear the wheels turning in Jessica's head. She was calculating whether this was a trick or an opportunity. What kind of gathering? Just cake and coffee in the afternoon. I'll sign the papers, and then we can all toast to new beginnings. I think it would help Michael feel better about everything if he saw that I'm truly at peace with this decision. That's very mature of you, Kathy. When were you thinking? This Saturday? Around 3 o'clock? I'd like Patricia to be there. And maybe Mrs. Henderson from next door. She's been such a good friend since Robert passed. Jessica agreed immediately. She probably thought having witnesses would make it impossible for me to back out again. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 2 weeks very carefully choosing those witnesses. Margaret Chun had agreed to come, along with Harold Vance and Dorothy Walsh, Jessica's previous victims, though Jessica didn't know I'd found them. Detective Martinez would be positioned outside, ready to act when I gave her the signal. Richard Steinberg, my attorney, would be there as well, ostensibly to notarize the documents. The most important addition was someone Jessica had never met, Dr. Ellen Rodriguez, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in evaluating mental competency in elder abuse cases. I'd asked Dr. Rodriguez to assess my mental state for the court case we were building. She'd spent 3 hours with me the previous week, conducting every cognitive test imaginable. "Mrs. Patterson," she told me afterwards, "you're sharper than most people half your age. Anyone claiming you're mentally incompetent would be lying." Now she was going to witness Jessica's tactics firsthand. Saturday morning, I woke up early to prepare. I'd spent the week teaching myself to use Robert's old video camera, a skill I'd never needed before but suddenly found essential. I positioned it in the living room bookshelf, barely visible behind Robert's collection of insurance manuals, with a clear view of where Jessica would be sitting. At 2:30, Patricia arrived first, as I'd asked her to. "Kathy, are you sure about this?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "Signing over your house seems so drastic. I need you to trust me, Pat. Can you do that?" She studied my face, then nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "Just watch. Watch everything Jessica does and says. And when I ask you direct questions, answer honestly." Margaret, Harold, and Dorothy arrived next. I'd introduced them to Patricia as old friends from church. Jessica wouldn't recognize them, but they'd certainly recognize her methods. Dr. Rodriguez came dressed casually, introduced as my neighbor's daughter who happened to be visiting. Richard Steinberg arrived precisely at 3, carrying his notary supplies. Michael and Jessica were the last to arrive. Jessica swept in wearing a designer dress and carrying an expensive handbag, looking like she was attending a business presentation rather than a family gathering. "Kathy," she announced, "I brought a bottle of champagne to celebrate your new beginning." She set the bottle on my dining room table next to the stack of legal documents, then began arranging chairs in what she clearly considered the optimal configuration, herself in the position of authority, me isolated on one side, everyone else positioned to observe. I let her orchestrate the seating, then activated the hidden video camera with the remote control I'd tucked into my pocket next to the audio recorder. "Before we begin," I said, settling into the chair Jessica had chosen for me, "I want everyone to understand exactly what's happening here. Jessica, would you explain to everyone what these papers mean?" Jessica's smile was radiant. "Of course. These documents transfer ownership of this house from Kathy to Michael and me. It's really the most practical solution. Kathy is getting older, and maintaining a house this size is becoming too much for her." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Patterson requested this transfer herself?" "Well, she needed some encouragement to see the wisdom of it," Jessica said with a little laugh. "You know how stubborn elderly people can be about change." Margaret Chen's eyebrows rose, but she said nothing. "What happens to Mrs. Patterson after the transfer?" Dr. Rodriguez continued. "We've found some lovely senior communities for her to consider. Independent living, but with support services when she needs them. And she's comfortable with this timeline?" Jessica's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "She's learning to be comfortable with it. Sometimes adult children have to make difficult decisions for their parents' own good." "I see." Dr. Rodriguez made a note on a small pad she'd pulled from her purse. "And Mrs. Patterson, you feel this decision is entirely voluntary?" This was my moment. Everything I'd planned depended on what happened next. "Actually," I said, making my voice sound uncertain, "I'm still not completely sure I understand all the implications. Jessica, could you explain again what happens if I change my mind later?" Jessica's expression tightened, but she maintained her pleasant tone. "Kathy, we've been over this several times. Once you sign the papers, the house belongs to Michael and me. You can't change your mind later." "But what if I wanted to visit? What if I wanted to spend holidays here?" "Well, that would be up to Michael and me to decide. We'd be the homeowners." Harold Vance shifted in his seat, his jaw clenching as he recognized the familiar pattern. And my belongings? My furniture, my photographs, Robert's things. We'll keep what fits with our decorating style and donate the rest. Don't worry, we'll make sure anything truly sentimental goes to a good home. Margaret made a small sound of disgust, quickly covered by a cough. Jessica, I continued. Last week you mentioned that if I didn't sign willingly, Michael was prepared to have me declared mentally incompetent. Could you explain that process to everyone? The room went very still. Jessica's smile faltered completely. That's not exactly what I said, Kathy. You're misremembering. Am I? Patricia, you've known me for 63 years. Do I seem mentally incompetent to you? Patricia's voice was steady and clear. Not at all. You seem sharper than ever, actually. Dr. Rodriguez, in your professional opinion, would you say I'm capable of making my own decisions about my living situation? Dr. Rodriguez looked directly at Jessica. From my observations today and my previous interactions with Mrs. Patterson, she demonstrates complete mental competency. Any suggestion otherwise would be medically inaccurate. Jessica's face began to flush. Who are you exactly? I'm a geriatric psychiatrist. I specialize in evaluating mental competency in situations exactly like this one. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica looked around the room, finally noticing that the people she'd expected to support her were watching her with expressions ranging from disapproval to outright hostility. Michael, she said, her voice rising slightly, tell them this is what's best for your mother. Michael looked uncomfortable, glancing between his wife and me. I thought Mom was on board with this. She is, Jessica insisted. She's just getting confused by all these questions. Actually, I said, standing up slowly, I'm not confused at all. I'm quite clear about what's been happening here. I walked to my bookshelf and retrieved the video camera, setting it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. This device has been recording our entire conversation. Jessica, you've just admitted in front of witnesses and on camera to planning to take my house, dispose of my belongings, and threaten me with false competency proceedings if I refuse to cooperate. Jessica's face went white, then flushed bright red. You can't record people without their consent. Actually, in this state, I can record conversations in my own home, Richard Steinberg said mildly. It's perfectly legal. Jessica spun toward him. Who are you? I'm Mrs. Patterson's attorney. I'm also a notary public, which is why I was invited to witness this document signing. He gestured toward the unsigned papers on the table. Though I have to say, based on what I've observed today, I would strongly advise my client against signing anything. Jessica was breathing hard now, her composure completely shattered. This is entrapment. You set me up. No, dear, I said calmly. You set yourself up. I simply gave you the opportunity to show everyone who you really are. I looked around the room at my carefully chosen witnesses. Margaret, Harold, and Dorothy were nodding grimly, recognizing the same tactics that had been used against them. Dr. Rodriguez was taking notes. Richard was calmly organizing his papers. Patricia looked stunned but determined. And Michael was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Jessica, he said slowly, did you really threaten to have Mom declared mentally incompetent? It wasn't a threat, it was a practical consideration. Did you threaten her or not? Jessica looked around the room desperately, realizing that every person present had witnessed her revealing her true nature. Her mask had slipped completely, and there was no putting it back on. That's when I walked to my front door and opened it. Detective Martinez was waiting on my front porch, just as we'd arranged. I think it's time, I said simply. As the detective stepped into my living room, Jessica's face crumpled with the realization of what was happening. She looked at Michael one last time, but he had turned away, unable or unwilling to meet her eyes. The trap had worked perfectly. Detective Martinez stepped into my living room with the quiet authority of someone who'd handled countless domestic situations gone wrong. But as her eyes swept the room, taking in the faces of my carefully assembled witnesses, I could see her realize this wasn't a typical family dispute. Mrs. Patterson, she said formally, you called about documenting additional evidence? Yes, Detective. Everyone here has witnessed Jessica Patterson attempt to coerce me into signing over my house through threats and intimidation. We have it all on video and audio recording. Jessica shot to her feet, her face flushed with panic and rage. This is ridiculous. I was trying to help my mother-in-law make a practical decision about her living situation. Ma'am, Detective Martinez said calmly, I'm going to need you to remain seated while I assess the situation. You can't arrest me for having a family discussion. Dr. Rodriguez cleared her throat. Detective, as a licensed psychiatrist, I can attest that Mrs. Patterson shows no signs of diminished mental capacity. The threats of competency proceedings that Mrs. Jessica Patterson made would constitute elder abuse under state law. Margaret Chin leaned forward in her chair. Detective, this woman did the exact same thing to me 2 years ago. She convinced me to sell my house to my nephew for half its value, then threatened me when I tried to back out. Jessica's eyes went wide as she recognized Margaret. I don't know what this woman is talking about. You told me I was too old to live alone, Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. You said my family was worried about my safety, that I should make the smart decision before someone had to make it for me. Harold Vance nodded grimly. She told me the same thing. Said my nephew was concerned about my ability to manage the farm, that signing it over to family would protect me from financial predators. Jessica was looking around the room frantically now, finally understanding that she was surrounded by her previous victims. These people are lying. They're confused elderly people who don't remember things correctly. Dorothy Walsh let out a sharp laugh. Confused? Honey, I may be 73, but I remember exactly how you manipulated me into signing over my house to my stepson. You said it was estate planning, but what you really meant was theft. Michael had been silent throughout this exchange, his face growing paler with each revelation. Finally he spoke. Jessica, is this true? Have you done this to other people? Michael, you can't believe these people over your own wife. Answer the question. Have you manipulated other elderly people into giving up their homes? Jessica's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. I help people make difficult transitions. That's not manipulation, it's professional guidance. Richard Steinberg pulled out a thick folder. Detective, I have documentation of at least 4 similar cases involving Mrs. Jessica Patterson over the past 3 years. In each case, elderly property owners were pressured into transferring ownership to family members, with Mrs. Patterson receiving either direct compensation or indirect benefits. That's standard real estate practice, Jessica said desperately. No, Richard replied. It's elder financial abuse, and when combined with threats of false competency proceedings, it becomes criminal coercion. Detective Martinez had been taking notes throughout this exchange. Now she looked directly at Jessica. Mrs. Patterson, I need to inform you that we've been investigating complaints about your business practices. Based on what I've witnessed here today, and the additional testimony from these witnesses, I have probable cause to arrest you for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and criminal coercion. The words hit Jessica like physical blows. She staggered backward, grabbing the arm of her chair for support. Michael, she pleaded, turning to her husband, you have to help me. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Michael stood up slowly, and for a moment I thought he might actually defend his wife. Instead, he walked to where I was sitting and knelt down beside my chair. Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have protected you instead of letting her. He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The betrayal was written all over his face, not betrayal of Jessica, but the dawning realization of how completely he'd betrayed me. Michael, don't let them do this to me, Jessica said, her voice rising to a near shriek. I'm your wife. We're supposed to be a team. Michael looked at her with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger, not hatred, but complete disappointment. A team doesn't try to steal from each other's family. A team doesn't threaten helpless people. She's not helpless. Jessica screamed. Look what she did. She set me up. She planned all of this. Yes, I said quietly, I did. Just like you planned to steal my house and throw me out with nothing. Detective Martinez stepped forward with handcuffs. Jessica Patterson, you're under arrest for elder abuse, attempted fraud, and criminal coercion. As the detective began reading Jessica her rights, the facade that had fooled my son for 6 years finally crumbled completely. Jessica began sobbing hysterically, not from remorse, but from the fury of someone whose carefully constructed con had been exposed. "You can't do this to me," she wailed as the handcuffs clicked shut. "I have rights. I have a business to run." "You had rights," Detective Martinez said firmly. "You forfeited them when you decided to prey on vulnerable people." As they prepared to lead Jessica out, she made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. "Michael, the house is still too big for her. She still can't maintain it. Everything I said about that was true." Michael looked at his wife with disgust. "Whether it's true or not, it was never your decision to make." The room fell silent as Detective Martinez escorted Jessica toward the door. But just before they reached it, Jessica broke free from the detective's grip and lunged toward me. "You ruined everything," she screamed, her perfectly manicured nails reaching for my face. "You stupid old woman, you ruined my entire life." Frank Morrison, Robert's old colleague who had quietly arrived during the confrontation, stepped between Jessica and me. At 72, Frank was still built like the former police officer he'd been before becoming an insurance investigator. "Ma'am," he said calmly, restraining Jessica with practiced ease. "You ruined your own life the moment you decided to prey on people who couldn't defend themselves." Detective Martinez quickly regained control of her prisoner. "Assault on an elderly person," she added grimly. "That's another charge." As Jessica was finally led away, still screaming threats and accusations, the room seemed to deflate. The tension that had been building for weeks suddenly released, leaving everyone emotionally drained. Michael sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "How could I have been so blind?" Patricia put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She was very good at what she did, Michael. She fooled a lot of people." Dr. Rodriguez closed her notebook and looked at me with professional admiration. "Mrs. Patterson, what you did today was extraordinary. Most elder abuse victims never get justice because they can't prove the manipulation occurred." "I had good teachers," I said, thinking of Robert and all the investigation techniques he'd shared with me over the years. "And I had help from people who understood what Jessica was doing." Margaret Chun was gathering her purse to leave. "Mrs. Patterson, thank you. I never thought I'd see that woman face consequences for what she did to me." Harold nodded emphatically. "She made me feel like a foolish old man who couldn't take care of himself. Today, she's the one who looked foolish." As my witnesses began to leave, Richard Steinberg approached me with a reassuring smile. "The charges against Jessica are serious, Mrs. Patterson. With the evidence we've gathered and the testimony from multiple victims, she's looking at significant jail time." "What about the other victims? The people she's already stolen from?" "That's going to be more complicated but not impossible. Now that there's a criminal case, civil suits become much more viable. We may be able to help Margaret and the others recover some of what they lost." After everyone had gone except Michael, Patricia, and me, we sat in my living room surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a celebration of my victimization. The unopened bottle of champagne Jessica had brought sat mockingly on the dining room table next to the unsigned documents that would have stolen my home. Michael looked at those papers with visible shame. "Mom, I don't know how to apologize for this." "You don't apologize, Michael. You learn from it. How can you forgive me? I chose her over you. I was ready to let her take everything Dad left you." I looked at my son, this grown man who had somehow forgotten that his mother raised him to be better than this, and felt my heart break a little. Not for what Jessica had tried to do to me, but for what she had done to him. "Michael, your wife was a professional manipulator. She spent years isolating you from me, making you doubt my capabilities, convincing you that her judgment was better than yours. You're a victim too." He shook his head. "That's no excuse. I should have trusted you." "You're right," I said gently. "You should have. But now you know what manipulation looks like. Make sure it never happens again." As Patricia and Michael cleaned up the remnants of the gathering, I walked through my house, the house Jessica had been so determined to steal. Every room looked exactly the same, but somehow everything felt different. For the first time in months, I felt safe in my own home. For the first time in years, I felt proud of my own strength. Jessica had seen an elderly widow and assumed she'd found easy prey. Instead, she'd awakened something she never expected. A woman who remembered how to fight. 3 months later, I was sitting on my front porch swing, watching the morning sun filter through the oak trees Robert had planted 30 years ago, when Michael's car pulled into my driveway. He'd been coming by every Sunday since Jessica's arrest, not because he felt obligated, but because we were slowly rebuilding something we'd lost long before his wife had tried to steal my house. Trust maybe. Or just the simple understanding that family means protecting each other, not preying on each other. "Morning, Mom," he called, carrying a bag from the hardware store. I brought the supplies for that kitchen cabinet repair. Michael had insisted on learning how to do the maintenance work around my house, not because I couldn't hire professionals, but because he wanted to understand what Jessica had been so dismissive of. The pride of ownership, the satisfaction of caring for something you love, the way a home becomes part of who you are. "Coffee's ready," I told him, settling deeper into the swing cushions Robert had sewn for me before his arthritis got too bad. As Michael worked on the cabinet hinges, I opened the letter that had arrived yesterday. The return address read, Henderson County District Attorney's Office. Jessica had pled guilty to all charges rather than face a trial where her other victims would testify. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, criminal coercion, and assault. The sentence was 4 years in prison, plus restitution to her victims and a permanent ban from working in real estate. "Good news?" Michael asked, noticing me reading. "Justice," I replied. "Sometimes it's the same thing." The legal aftermath had been more satisfying than I'd expected. Not just Jessica's conviction, but the ripple effects. Margaret Chun had been able to sue her nephew for the house sale, and with Jessica unable to testify on his behalf, Margaret had won a settlement that let her buy a small condo she actually wanted. Harold Vance had reclaimed his farm from his manipulative nephew. Dorothy Walsh was still fighting her case, but with Jessica's conviction on record, her chances looked excellent. Most surprisingly, the State Real Estate Board had launched a broader investigation into elder financial abuse in property transactions. Jessica's conviction had opened doors for other victims to come forward. "There's something else," Michael said, setting down his screwdriver and joining me on the porch. "I've been thinking about what Jessica said that day. About the house being too big for you." My stomach clenched. After everything we'd been through, was he still going to pressure me to move? She was right about one thing, Mom. This house is big. But she was wrong about everything else. I waited, not sure where this was going. "It's not too big for you. It's too empty. You should have people here who appreciate it the way you and Dad did." Over the past month, Michael had been bringing Emma and David by more often. My grandchildren, now 23 and 20, had been horrified to learn what their stepmother had tried to do to me. Emma had actually cried when she heard about the birthday party humiliation. "What are you suggesting?" "Emma's been talking about moving back to town after she finishes her master's degree. She loves this house, always has. What if she rented the upstairs room from you? Not as a caretaker or anything like that, but as a tenant who happens to be your granddaughter." I considered this. Emma was studying to be a teacher, and she'd always been responsible, unlike her father at that age. Having someone in the house again, hearing footsteps upstairs and voices in the kitchen, might be exactly what I needed. And David's been asking if he could use the garage for his woodworking projects. He wants to start a small furniture business, and he needs workshop space. Like Robert's old workshop? Exactly like that. Dad would have loved seeing those tools get used again. I looked out at my yard, imagining it full of family again. Not people trying to take from me, but people wanting to build something together. "We'll need to draw up proper rental agreements," I said finally. "I won't have anyone living here out of pity or obligation." Michael grinned. "Emma already insisted on that. She wants to pay market rent and split utilities. And ground rules. No overnight guests without permission. No loud music after 10. No leaving dishes in the sink. Just like when I was a teenager. Exactly like when you were a teenager." We sat quietly for a while, watching a pair of cardinals build a nest in the maple tree by my mailbox. New life taking root in familiar places. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know? How did you see through Jessica when I couldn't?" I'd been expecting this question for months. "Experience, maybe. Your father always said that people show you who they are if you pay attention." Jessica was always calculating, always measuring things for their value to her. But I lived with her for 6 years. How did I miss it? Because she needed you to miss it. Her whole plan depended on you trusting her more than you trusted your own judgment. She was very good at making people doubt themselves. Michael was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry I doubted you. You're forgiven. But Michael, promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll trust your instincts next time. If something feels wrong, don't let anyone convince you it's right just because it's convenient. I promise. That afternoon after Michael left, I walked through my house room by room. The dining room where Jessica had tried to humiliate me now held a new set of family photos, pictures of Emma's college graduation, David's first woodworking project, Michael at his new job as a construction supervisor, a career change he'd made after divorcing Jessica. In the living room, I'd rearranged the furniture back to the way Robert and I had liked it, with the couch facing the fireplace instead of positioned for watching television. The bookshelf where I'd hidden the video camera now held Robert's insurance investigation manuals, alongside my new collection of legal self-help books. The kitchen still smelled like the coffee cake I'd made for Michael's visit, and the cabinet he'd repaired opened smoothly for the first time in months. Small improvements, but they felt like victories. Upstairs, Emma's future room was already partially furnished with pieces she'd asked me to save from the donation pile. She wanted Robert's old desk and the quilt my grandmother had made. Things Jessica would have thrown away as outdated junk. As I stood in my bedroom doorway, I caught sight of myself in the antique mirror Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. The same mirror Jessica had once criticized as old-fashioned clutter. The woman looking back at me wasn't the helpless victim Jessica had expected to find. She was someone who'd learned to fight when fighting was necessary. Someone who discovered that being underestimated could be a powerful weapon. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. The caller ID showed Margaret Chin's number. Kathy, I hope you don't mind me calling. Margaret's voice was stronger than it had been 3 months ago. I wanted you to know. I got the settlement check today. I'm buying that little condo on Maple Street, the one with the garden space. That's wonderful, Margaret. I never would have had the courage to fight if you hadn't shown me it was possible. You saved more than just your own house, you know. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back patio, looking out at the vegetable garden I'd planted in April. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, things Jessica had called a waste of time and energy. The garden was thriving. Like me. 6 months ago, I'd been a lonely widow that everyone assumed was easy prey. I'd been written off as too old, too trusting, too set in my ways to defend myself effectively. Jessica had seen an elderly woman living alone in a house too big for one person and assumed she'd found a perfect victim. What she'd actually found was someone who remembered what it meant to fight for what you love. The house around me wasn't too big or too much work. It was home. It was the place where Robert and I had built a life together, where we'd raised Michael, where we'd planned to grow old together before cancer stole him away too soon. Jessica had tried to steal more than just property. She tried to steal my history, my independence, my dignity. She tried to reduce me to a problem that needed solving rather than a person who deserved respect. But some things can't be stolen, only given away. And I decided not to give anything away anymore. As the sun set behind the oak trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I raised my wine glass in a small toast. To Robert, who'd taught me to pay attention and trust my instincts. To the friends who'd helped me when I needed it. To the justice system that had actually worked the way it was supposed to. And to myself for remembering that being 63 didn't mean being defenseless. Tomorrow, Emma would come by to measure her future room. David would start clearing out the garage workshop. Michael would continue learning how to be the son I'd raised him to be. My house would be full of family again, but this time on my terms. People who wanted to be here, who appreciated what we were building together, who understood that love isn't about control or ownership. I'd learned something important these past few months. Getting older doesn't make you weak. It makes you experienced. And experience, properly applied, is more powerful than youth, beauty, or manipulation. Jessica had gambled that an elderly widow would be too scared, too isolated, or too confused to fight back effectively. She'd lost that gamble completely. As I locked my front door and turned off the porch light, I felt something I hadn't experienced in the 3 years since Robert's death. Complete peace with my place in the world. I was home. I was safe. I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I owned. And I was nobody's victim anymore.